This is what I do with my time. It's not in the IndieWeb sphere, but it shares a whole lot of the same principles. The idea is that we can use peer-to-peer networking to make websites 10x easier or more to make. So we use this protocol called DAT, which is a lot like BitTorrent. You can host a website directly off of your device. You'll register yourself in a global tracker that you have the website available, and people can find you and access the site. So what we're looking at right here is a fork of Chrome that I work on called Beaker. It's the Beaker browser, and this is actually a beta build that is not yet out. But the upside of using peer-to-peer technology is that you do not need a web server. Well, actually, let's not do that one. Let's do... You do not need a web server to create a website. You can mint a key pair, and just like that, you have a website. So this is not a very nice one, but this is a website that I just created. If I share this URL here with somebody, they would be able to access these two files. I have a built-in editor inside of it. So why don't we go ahead and create an index.html real fast. All right, now it's a little bit better, right? So this URL right here, it's very similar actually to how HTTPS works, except that rather than having HTTP in the front, you got the DAT scheme in the front. And then rather than having a IP address, you have these keys. It does support DNS, however, so if you wanted to do DAT, beakerbrowser.com, it'll work just fine, right? But in every other regard, it works exactly the same. You have a path at the end of it, so you can, let's go over here. You can put, index.html at the end, and you'll get the index file, right? So it works exactly as you would expect. Okay, by the way, I have a crash bug which just manifested, and this is killing me, so I'm going to have to probably restart the browser multiple times. Okay, so does that all sort of make sense? It's a sort of a stand-in, drop-in replacement for HTTP, but the upside is you don't have to set up a server to run a website. You can just, right out of your browser, share from one browser to another a new website. Okay, so the premise of what we're doing is really similar to the IndieWeb in the sense that we want to just have people running their own websites and interacting with each other through these websites. So here is my personal site right here. It's a normal blog, which if you go to this URL, you'd be able to access.
That short thing, is that like an abbreviated display, or is that something I can use to
It's an abbreviated display, yeah. If you want to make it a short name, you get DNS involved. So being entirely peer-to-peer, having no server side, one of the most interesting sort of side effects is that whenever you visit a site, the full source code is available to you. So you can view the source of any website that you visit and start digging around. And then if you wanted to, you could even decide to duplicate the website, make a copy, and start changing it and remixing it and things like that. So it's sort of designed to be a little more open source, a little more hackable for people. And on top of this, it is actually possible to build some pretty advanced applications in a similar way that IndieWeb does, where just by posting JSON files on your website and then syncing each other's websites, you're able to build things like social media feeds. It's kind of like how RSS works, right? Where if I do a post right here, hello Austin, and then if I go back over to my personal, let's jump to my personal site and look at the data. And the feed folder. You'll just find this JSON file, which declares its schema, has a timestamp on it. And anybody that follows me can sync down this file and put it into a feed view, right? So it's similar to having an RSS stream. It's just a file that you pull down to synchronize between different websites. And as a result, you're able to create these aggregated applications like a feed or even search. And profiles and things like that. Actually, I want to go to.
So that search, where is it being run?
That's being run entirely inside of the browser. All the applications we looked at are all actually applications that run in user land. So let's run that search again. So this application right here is a DAT application, which for the moment I'm actually aliasing to just the non-global domain name of search, but I'll probably actually put that on a full domain name later. But if I want to, I can actually view the source of this application just like any other DAT website. And so see, here's the entry point. Well, I guess here's the index.html. I've gone all in on web components as of late, and which is really cool for me because I don't need a build step with it. So if you were to fork this website and start making changes, you wouldn't have to run any build step. It's using the Polymer framework, which since its new incarnation has gotten a lot better. So this is the source code to it. There's a back end of this application stack, which is provided by the browser and exposes as an API, which I'm not going to get into right now, but it reads and writes off these DAT files. Right, so that's pretty much this system. Does anybody have any questions for me? Yeah, go ahead.
Is there possibly some kind of like list of like deeper browser applications, like examples to like get you started or whatever?
Yeah, we have a website that maintains So I just wrote a file which, if I'm really lucky, should just show up in my feed. There it is. So yeah, there's no dedicated backend to these websites. They're all just client-side logic, reading and writing files, or using APIs that themselves read and write files.
So there's not really, if I wanted to make my website available on that, I don't really have an immediate path to do it because I do everything server-side.
You have a server-side component? Yeah, you're out of luck.
So I have to I would have to basically have a build step that publishes all of my pages into these documents.
You'd have to have all the content be rendered out into a file set and then loaded into a DAT so that people could access it. It's really similar to a BitTorrent.
Yeah.
Yeah, except it's dynamic. BitTorrents can't change, DATs can.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. So So it's static, but by syncing files in sort of an RSS sort of way, you can make dynamic behaviors.
Yeah, that's interesting. How does the authentication work? What causes you to be able to write to this thing, but not somebody else?
So every DAT site, has these long addresses. These are public keys, hex encoded. Private key controls whether or not you're able to write to it.
So you made that in this browser, so the private key lives in this browser now?
Yeah. Yeah, question?
So, I guess piggybacking onto that, where are we on multi-writer support?
So multi-writer support is the ability for more than one device to be able to write to a DAT site. At the moment, it's not done. I'm thinking maybe by summer. It just requires some serious engineering work to get right.
Is that something beyond sharing the private key?
Yeah, the way that the internal structure works is the log structure inside of it. And it's, at the moment, really important that you don't split the history of that log. You can only publish one history, and if you see a split, then other people won't sync it anymore. It actually has a nice property for security if you really want to make sure that everybody gets one timeline of data. It's good to have this sort of thing where if it splits, the thing becomes corrupted. Good for software and making sure that you're not getting given a payload in this like a uniquely served to you version of the site. You're sort of guaranteed that everybody gets the same site. So if it's an application that controls sensitive data, that's a positive. It's very auditable. That's what makes sense. But the downside, of course, is that if you have more than one device writing to the same log, it's very easy for them to split the history because they're not coordinating with each other. So we have to get in a system where instead you mint a new key pair and you can say this key pair can also be a writer. It has its own log, and we use a CRDT to merge them together. So I kind of really YOLO'd this thing because I didn't prepare. So any question that you all have, feel free.
Are there any works in progress as far as ports for mobile devices like iOS, Android?
Yeah, I wouldn't like hold my breath for them right now. There's somebody who just got funded to work on a project for it, but most of the stack is written in Node. And there's a Rust port that's like in the works, but the reality is that it's difficult to get a good mobile browser going, especially whenever your networking stack is written in Node. So I do know somebody that's kind of starting to work on it, but it's going to be delayed by at least, it's going to be a year behind the desktop work at least. We don't have, our resources are still pretty thin right now.
Right.
Yeah.
I noticed that you published identity spec, and I was kind of curious, what is that hoping to be a catalyst for in terms of pushing the browser?
Yeah, so the specs that I published, I'm not going to say for sure whether or not any of that ends up being the final design. After doing a lot of spec publishing, I then just sort of turtled up and did some development work, so it may change. You'll notice up in the top right here, I have a little identity thing, and basically what we're using is DAT sites as identities, which within the DAT world simply means that if you visit my website and you want to interact with me, you would follow my address, and then you would @me, and if I follow your address, then we'd be able to exchange information by publishing files saying, hey, this is for you, and okay, right, I pull that down, just like RSS. When we get into authenticating with services at some point, it should be possible to do things like publishing a proof, like I want to sign into Google. Google says, okay, publish this file that includes nonce, proving that you are paulfrazee.com. I would write that to a challenges folder somewhere, and they'd be able to pull that off the DAT network and say, okay, well, if you obviously control the Paul Frazee website because you just wrote that file that we gave you with an unguessable number. So that could be used as a way to do logins at some point. Yeah. Bookmarks application is in user land now, along with everything else. So So if you wanted to make your own bookmarks app, you could open up the source and make that happen. At some point, I'm planning on having the bookmarks be something else that you can publish. In fact, by having the identity tied into the browser, I can do some interesting things which I haven't gotten to yet, but one of them is, for instance, if you want to make a bookmark public, you could just, when you do the bookmark, have a little toggle on here and say make it public, and it'll publish to your website, and there you go, you're publishing the bookmark. Does that make sense? Something else I can do, which I have a little bit of code in there for, but it's not totally done, is make it so that whenever you visit somebody's website, you can pull in some social information into the address bar where the certificate information traditionally goes, right up here. So that's the state of it right now. But traditionally we use certificate authorities. You're connecting somewhere with HTTPS, it would just be saying, yes, this has been signed off by Komodo or whoever that has done the certification of the site. Well, with the social graph that the browser understands, you could start to have something like, okay, well, you don't know this person, but two people that you follow this person. So you can have some kind of level of trust that this identity is who they're claiming to be, that kind of thing. That's kind of a nice value proposition. And it gets more interesting whenever you start to get applications involved, which are going to be accessing your data. For instance, I've got this bookmarks application. That's an API that somebody else could make a user-land application to read and write bookmarks. It might be sort of important that I trust an application that does that. So by having this sort of awareness of, well, this bookmarks application was published by a friend of mine, I can trust that it was written by somebody that I trust. So you can start to build sort of web of trust certification system for software in addition to identities.
Very different way of thinking about things. It's interesting.
Yeah. It's been, it's interesting. I have no idea if anybody's really going to go for this, but it's the one thing that I know for sure is that we can make making websites easier, and everything else sort of is in service of that. So, cool.
How much do you see mobile being, you said that there's a project starting up? It kind of seems to me that anything has to be done, like a website creation has to be done on mobile where it really get used.
Yeah, I understand that perspective. I definitely agree that for this to become something that matters in the long run, it has to happen. But I also kind of feel like we can validate out what we're trying to do prior to being that happen. Especially because sort of interesting value proposition is being able to fuzz with the source code, which you can't really take advantage of in a mobile browser. That's all sort of an excuse, though. Like I said, I don't have the resources to accelerate the timeline on that. So it's sort of like we got to prove out that people like it enough that they'll use it on desktop without the mobile component. And if we can, we should be able to get the resources to invest in mobile.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for listening, y'all.